You wake up to the sound of boots stomping on stone. No alarm clock, no coffee. Just the smell of damp wool and sweat from the soldier next to you who hasn't figured out what soap is. Outside, the sun is barely up, but the Legion is already breaking camp. Breakfast? A bowl of thick, grainy mush pulls, slapped into your hands. It's tasteless, joyless, and about as exciting as watching paint dry. But it'll keep you marching. Welcome to life as a Roman soldier. No Wi-Fi, no comfy beds, and definitely no protein shakes. The Romans didn't just survive, they thrived. Their food didn't rot, their water didn't kill them, and their survival tricks still hold up today. Imagine biting into rock-hard, salty bread after a 30-mile march, or chugging a cup of watered-down vinegar like it's a protein shot at the world's worst gym. They didn't have modern luxuries, but they had grit. If civilization collapsed tomorrow, their ancient hacks would separate the men from the corpses. And here's the kicker. The Romans had nutrition figured out before modern fitness bros even existed. The Romans were out there crushing entire empires fueled by barley mush. No supplements, no meal plans, just fire, water, and a pinch of salt if they were feeling fancy. But food was just the start. What you drank could be the difference between another day in the empire or dying hunched over a latrine. In a city like Rome, one bad sip of water didn't just ruin your day, it ruined your entire existence. If you were lucky, you'd get off with a week of stomach cramps. Step 1 of Roman hydration: don't drink the river mystery juice. Soldiers on the march had a trick. Drop a silver coin into their water jug. They didn't know why it worked, just that it kept them from spending the night curled up in agony. The rich lined their jugs with silver sheets, while the poor boiled their water and hoped for the best. Somewhere out there, a modern doomsday prepper is nodding in approval while stockpiling silver bars. The Romans might not have had modern science, but they knew one thing. Survival wasn't about comfort, it was about strategy. Food that lasted, water that didn't kill you, and an army tough enough to march 30 miles, fight a battle, and still complain about how bad the wine was afterward. 2,000 years later, we've got more technology, better diets, and actual beds, but let's be real. Most guys today wouldn't last a week in a Roman legion. Of course, not everyone had silver lying around. Some used cloth to filter out the chunky bits, while others just boiled their water and hoped for the best. And yet, somehow, the Romans still managed to drink water without turning their intestines into a disaster zone. Romans weren't just throwing water over fire for fun. They likely got the idea from watching volcanic hot springs, nature's way of screaming, "You don't want to drink that raw." The heat killed bacteria long before anyone knew what bacteria was. All they knew was that drinking straight from a river was like playing a very short game of, "Will I die today?" But boiling alone wasn't enough. The Romans had another trick up their sleeve. We're used to drinking plain water. Roman soldiers, they weren't about that life. Instead of trusting whatever sketchy stream they found, they spiked their water with vinegar. Ever heard of Posca? It was basically the Gatorade of the Roman Empire. Just water, vinegar, and a little salt. Tastes like disappointment? Works like a charm. Gross? Absolutely. Effective? No question. Roman soldiers spent hours under the brutal sun, sweat pouring down their backs, armor turning them into human ovens. Plain water wouldn't cut it. That's where Posca came in, a mouth-puckering mix of vinegar and water that kept them going when their bodies were screaming, "Please, no more marching." The vinegar wasn't just for flavor, because, let's be honest, it had none. It replaced lost minerals, stopped muscle cramps before they turned a soldier into a useless pile on the ground, and, most importantly, killed bacteria. Even the nastiest water became somewhat drinkable thanks to the acidity wiping out whatever microscopic nightmares were lurking inside. And it wasn't just for soldiers. Poor folks drank it too. The rich sipped fancy wine while everyone else was stuck with Posca, but at least it kept them alive. Roman medics even used vinegar to clean wounds, thinking it helped fight infections. Turns out, they were onto something. Even today, survival experts trust vinegar to get the job done. If you ever find yourself stranded in the wild with nothing but a bottle of vinegar, congratulations! You've got a disinfectant, a wound cleaner, and a hydration hack, all in one. Sure, it tastes awful, but so does that overpriced sports drink claiming to revolutionize hydration. At least Posca has 2,000 years of results to back it up. But staying alive wasn't just about drinking the right water or eating the right food. While other civilizations were still figuring out how not to die from bad water, the Romans were out here building aqueducts, roads, and entire cities that made everyone else look like cavemen banging rocks together. Ever noticed how modern roads fall apart after one winter? The Romans built theirs over 2,000 years ago, and they're still standing. Today's highways get a little rain and suddenly turn into a maze of potholes, detours, and traffic cones that never disappear. Meanwhile, Roman roads still handling business like absolute units. The secret? Roman concrete. Unlike today's asphalt, which crumbles faster than your New Year's resolutions, Roman concrete actually got stronger over time. The trick was volcanic ash mixed with lime and seawater, creating a material that could heal itself. Small cracks? No problem. The chemical reaction with moisture sealed them up on its own. Meanwhile, modern road crews are out here patching the same pothole every year like it's a family tradition. But Roman concrete wasn't just for roads. It held up harbors, aqueducts, and Colosseums that still exist today, while buildings from the 20th century are already falling apart. Scientists have spent years trying to figure out what made it so strong. Turns out the secret was lime clasts, tiny chunks of calcium that acted like built-in repair kits. When cracks formed, these chunks dissolved, sealed them up, and made the structure stronger. So while modern engineers are still scratching their heads about how to stop their buildings from collapsing, Rome had it figured out 2,000 years ago. And if that wasn't enough, they also mastered the night. Long before light switches and backup generators, Romans figured out how to keep the darkness at bay. Oil lamps. But let's be real, fire was their only option, so they made it work. Just a little olive oil and a wick, and boom, instant light. The same stuff you drown your salad in. Yeah, it once kept entire cities glowing. Back in Roman times, your kitchen wasn't just for cooking, it was your power station too. Olive oil wasn't just for dipping bread, it was a lifeline. No light, no food, no fun. That's why people carried their own olive oil everywhere, kind of like lugging around a power bank today. Out of oil? Hope you like darkness. It was so important that some people had secret olive oil stashes. And if you think that's weird, consider this. Olive oil was so valuable, it was sometimes used as currency. Imagine paying rent with a bottle of extra virgin. But while olive oil kept them illuminated, the Romans had another golden liquid that was even more powerful. The Romans weren't just drizzling honey on their bread, they treated it like liquid gold. Sure, it was delicious, but more importantly, it was a survival tool. Honey was their go-to for healing wounds, fighting infections, and keeping food fresh. Basically, honey was their all-in-one first aid kit. Like Neosporin, a snack, and a home remedy all rolled into one, but without the side-eye from your doctor. And here's where it gets wild. Modern doctors still swear by it. Hospitals today actually use honey for burns and infections. Romans, got a problem? Just add honey. Turns out the Romans weren't just onto something, they nailed it centuries before Big Pharma could slap a label on it and charge you $50 a jar. You could store honey for decades and it would never spoil. Archaeologists have found 3,000-year-old honey in Egyptian tombs that's still perfectly edible. Meanwhile, we have milk that expires in 3 days. But while honey was great in emergencies, the Romans had another essential survival tool. Roman soldiers didn't strut around in cloaks just for the fashion statement. These things were the Swiss army knives of fabric. They kept them warm in winter, shielded them from the rain, doubled as a blanket, and even worked as an emergency bandage when things got bloody. Think of it as the ancient Roman version of one of those all-season jackets that somehow still leave you freezing, but without the ridiculous $300 price tag. Roman cloaks, stylish, warm, and mildly itchy. Survivalists today still swear by wool cloaks, and for good reason. They're tough, warm, and ridiculously useful. It's basically the medieval Snuggie, cozy, functional, and perfect for those long nights contemplating life around a campfire. Romans weren't just staying warm, they were staying smart. And if you think that's impressive, wait until you hear what they did to keep their food fresh. Romans didn't have fridges, freezers, or coolers, yet they managed to store food for months without it turning into a science experiment. Their secret? Underground cellars and clay containers. They buried food in cool, shaded pits to keep it from spoiling and used sealed clay jars to block out air and moisture. Some even filled their jars with olive oil, honey, or salt to preserve things longer. It wasn't high-tech, but it worked. No electricity needed. Meal prep before it got annoying. Root cellars were the Romans' natural refrigerators, dug deep into the ground to stay cool year-round. No electricity, no fancy cooling systems, just the earth doing its job. These underground storage spaces kept fruits, vegetables, and grains from spoiling too fast, making them last through hot summers. Some were even sealed with wax or resin to lock in freshness and prevent spoilage. The meat was a different challenge, especially for soldiers and travelers who needed food on the go. To make it last, Romans relied on salting and smoking. Salt drew out moisture and stopped bacteria from growing, while smoking added flavor and helped preserve meat even longer. It wasn't exactly fresh steak, but it beat going hungry on long journeys. It was simple, effective, and way better than relying on a sketchy gas station snack after a long trip. The Romans were so good at food preservation that they even figured out fermentation. This process didn't just keep food from spoiling, it actually made it healthier. Today, chefs and nutritionists are bringing these old methods back to life. And if modern civilization ever collapses, knowing how to store food like a Roman might just save your life. Wealthy Romans would ship in ice from the mountains, store it in pits, and use it to chill their drinks in the summer. Basically, ancient Romans had their own version of a Yeti cooler, just, without the ridiculous price tag. Food preservation wasn't just about convenience, it was about survival. Soldiers marching for days needed food that wouldn't spoil, and civilians had to plan ahead for winter. Salted meats, fermented fish, and pickled vegetables were all part of the game plan. If you wanted to make it through the lean months, you had to know how to store your food properly. Without a way to keep food fresh, an entire city could face disaster. And speaking of long journeys, Romans had another survival trick up their sleeves. Imagine a road trip without gas stations, GPS, or rest stops. That was daily life for Roman travelers. But they weren't winging it. They had an entire network of roadside inns, supply stations, and detailed maps to guide them. The Romans practically invented the travel infrastructure we rely on today. Their roads were so well built that some are still in use, which is more than can be said for modern highways that fall apart after one bad winter. Romans built roads. We build temporary suggestions. Soldiers, merchants, and messengers needed a foolproof system to get from point A to point B, and they had one. Mile markers, detailed road signs, and way stations ensured that anyone traveling through the empire knew exactly where they were. Compare that to today, where one wrong turn can send you into a Wi-Fi dead zone with no idea where you are. Romans never lost signal, just got lost. Without their meticulous planning, their empire wouldn't have lasted as long as it did. They built roads for efficiency, but survival wasn't just about moving from place to place. It was about adapting to whatever the environment threw at them. And speaking of using every resource, the Romans had one more trick up their sleeves when it came to hydration. In a world without running water on demand, Romans had to get creative. Their solution? Aqueducts. These massive structures transported fresh water from mountain springs to cities, ensuring a steady supply for drinking, bathing, and even fountains. But in emergencies, Romans had another trick. They collected rainwater in giant cisterns and underground reservoirs. These underground storage systems ensured that even in the worst droughts, water was still available. Resourcefulness didn't stop at making water safe to drink, it was about making sure there was always enough to go around. Clever engineering meant that even in times of drought, they weren't left high and dry. Cities had public water fountains where people could fill up, and homes had built-in storage to keep water available year-round. Today, rainwater collection is making a comeback as a sustainable solution. Turns out, Romans were ahead of the curve once again. They knew that clean water wasn't just about survival, it was the foundation of civilization. From roads that refused to crumble to cloaks that doubled as survival gear, the Romans knew how to make the most of what they had. Their secrets weren't just about thriving in their time, they're lessons we could still use today. But while knowing what to take was crucial, making sure it didn't burn down the house was just as important. And fire? That was a whole different survival game. Forget lighters, forget matches. Romans had fire making down to an art. Romans carried fire in their pockets, sort of. Basically, ancient lighters, just way less convenient. They used amado, a weird fungus that smoldered like a lump of slow-burning coal, letting them reignite a fire instantly without starting from scratch. It wasn't just about making fire, it was about keeping embers alive, ready to reignite at a moment's notice. Instead of constantly starting from scratch, they kept smoldering embers wrapped in dried leaves or moss, making fire starting much faster and easier. Survivalists today swear by this method, proving that some tricks never go out of style. Imagine if cavemen had TikTok. This fungus would be trending as the ultimate life hack. Influencers would charge $99 for Roman fire dust. But while fire kept them warm, their biggest challenge was staying alive in a world where even a sip of water could be dangerous. The Romans had to find safe water. They boiled it, filtered it, or turned it into wine. Wine was often safer. Alcohol killed bacteria and made life a little more bearable. Vinegar also helped disinfect water, which is why soldiers drank Posca, a mix of water, vinegar, and herbs. For centuries, fermented drinks kept people alive before clean water was common. The Romans made survival an art, turning necessity into an advantage. We stress over dead phone batteries, but the Romans solved real survival problems. They built roads that outlasted empires, mastered fire starting, and preserved food better than we do today. Long before germ theory, they purified water and pushed innovation forward. They didn't just survive, they thrived in a world that tried to kill them. We like to think we're advanced far beyond the ancient world, but when it comes to the basics of survival, Romans had it figured out. They weren't just tough, they were brilliant. Their solutions worked so well that thousands of years later, we're still borrowing from them. Maybe it's time to stop underestimating the past and start taking a few notes from the people who managed to conquer half the known world without a single modern convenience. Next time someone acts like ancient civilizations were clueless, hit them with this. The Romans were basically the ultimate survivalists. These people weren't just building empires, they were engineering their way through disasters, thriving where others would crumble. If you ever find yourself in a tough spot, you'd probably wish you had a Roman strategist whispering in your ear. Curious about more forgotten survival tricks? Dive into our other videos for more ancient wisdom that still holds up. And don't just scroll past. Subscribe! Because history isn't just dusty old tales. It's a survival guide waiting to be cracked open.